APACC is happy to present Laura Huang. Laura is the author of the book Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage, and was featured on Good Morning America. She is a professor at Harvard Business School. Her research examines interpersonal relationships and implicit bias in entrepreneurship and in the workplace. Her award-winning research has been featured in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Forbes, and Nature.
Today I'm going to be talking about my recent book entitled Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage, and some of the factors and the research that went into thinking about adversity and what it means to be able to turn and redirect constraints and obstacles and perceptions and adversity to work in your favor. So I want to start with a really quick story that is a story about one of my very first jobs. It was my first job out of the MBA program. I was doing an MBA program and I had some ideas about what I wanted to do, but I had all of these student loans that I had to pay off. Loans that I had accumulated through my undergraduate years as well as through the MBA program. So I wasn't able to actually go after some of these other jobs that I wanted. And so instead I sort of asked some of my classmates, I said to them, what's the quickest way to pay off student loans? What's the quickest way to pay off student loans? And a lot of my friends would kind of say to me, go into iBanking, go into iBanking. And I remember turning to one of them and saying, wow, this internet banking thing is really big these days, having no idea that the I in iBanking actually stood for investment banking instead of internet banking. So you can imagine that I had a lot of imposter syndrome going into this job, entering into this industry that was heavily male dominated, that I didn't have a background in, but that I had somehow lucked my way into getting a job in this industry. So I sort of committed to myself, right? I said to myself, I'm just going to work really, really hard. I'm going to just put in lots of hard work and effort and really show everyone and prove to myself as well as others that I belong in this sort of role. And so I started at this bank, this investment bank, and the vice president of the company said, okay, well, we have this project that we want you to work on. You have this technical background. We want you to work on this M&A deal, this mergers and acquisitions deal. And so what we have here is that we have a client and they're trying to decide whether to acquire company A, company B, or company C. So what we need you and your team to do is put together an economic model, put together a financial model that helps us decide whether or not we should acquire company A, B, or C, and which of these it should be. And so my team and I, for 2 months, we put together this model with different states of the world and different interest rates and different assumptions. And after the 2 months, we presented it to both the VP and the client, and we said, you should acquire company B. And here's why. We sort of showed our model. And I'll never forget, both the VP and the client kind of looked at me and they said, wow, this model is amazing. It has everything in it that we would ever have wanted to be in it. This should be an industry standard. Financial institutions and banks around the world should be using this model. And I remember thinking, okay, this is a good sign. But then they sort of paused and they said, there's only one problem. The problem is that we already decided that we want to acquire company A. So can you now redo your model to make it say that we should acquire company A? And so I remember thinking at the time, and even now, there's a couple of things that sort of I always remember about this. The first is that this is how a lot of companies actually make decisions, right? That it's not always based on quantitative or models or any sort of hard factors, that they have some sort of an intuition or that there are soft factors or perceptions or something that they have that lead them in a certain direction. And they then post hoc rationalize or post hoc find the data to sort of support what they always wanted to do anyways. the second thing that I sort of came to terms with was this notion of hard work, right? We're really taught from a young age that success is about hard work. That if you put in that hard work, just put your head down and work hard, and you'll get those outcomes. You'll achieve success, right? You ask super successful individuals, people who are CEOs or Olympic gold medal holders or world record breakers, what's the secret to your success? And inevitably they will mention hard work as being a key factor. Or you ask companies, how did you sort of achieve this amazing growth, and how did you achieve all of these milestones? And they say, we just really worked hard. We worked hard at our product or our service or with our business. We really put in that effort, and that led us to these outcomes and success. So we're taught and we're told that success is about hard work. And yet, in the back of our minds and throughout the course of our lives, we have these experiences and these examples of when hard work alone is actually not enough, right? We know that hard work alone is not enough. Hard work is critical, but hard work alone is not enough. And that's because it's often about the signals and the perceptions and the stereotypes of others, regardless of whether they are suppliers or partners or investors or other companies or consumers or what have you. And so I have been studying disparities and disadvantages and who's underestimated, which individuals and which companies are underestimated, and where are the disparities in terms of performance of companies or individuals, and trying to identify what are those sort of factors. And those factors are really based, again, on these perceptions and attributions that we're making, that I could, in a variety of different situations, manipulate certain signals or perceptions and predict how successful they would be based on, or predict the disparities or the differences based on these signals and these perceptions. And so as I was presenting this work, I would get the question, well, what can we do about this, right? What can we do about the fact that there are these differences? How do we level the playing field? How do we level the playing field, especially when we think about things like perceptions that are based on, the typical cast of characters that we hear about, things like gender, race, ethnicity, class, religion, sexual orientation. But for companies, it's also based on the company culture and how trustworthy it seems, or how committed this company seems, or a variety of different sort of factors. And what I found was that so much of the literature and so much of the research that was out there focused on system level or structural solutions. And what I mean by that is it was looking at solutions that were around things like, well, let's have more equitable hiring practices. Let's have checklists for how we hire, or let's have algorithms that help us be more more methodical in the decisions that we're making about our business or our business model. And over and over and over again, there was these sort of system level or outside in solutions. But what I found was that from the inside out, there was very little that we could do. Meaning, as leaders or as individuals within organizations, we were sort of being told, just wait, right? Just wait. We know that there's this myth of meritocracy. We know that things are not decided based on hard signals, but just wait and things will get better. And this was leaving a lot of individuals very, very frustrated. And so for the last couple of years, what I've been studying is really these intuitions behind being able to hone your ability to see where these perceptions and signals lie. Basically, how do we quantify the unquantifiable? How do we quantify what someone's intuition or gut feel looks like? How do we hone our ability to see the way that our company or we as individuals are being perceived, so that we can then take these perceptions or take these stereotypes that might be out there and flip these stereotypes and obstacles in our favor? How do we guide and redirect and turn these things in our favor so that we can find and create our own edge? And that's what went into this research, and that's what went into this book. And so I'll give a couple of examples here of how this sort of works. The title of my book is Edge, but EDGE actually stands for the framework that I've developed over the last decade of my research, where the E, D, G, and E actually stand for the components of this framework, where the E stands for enrich, the D stands for delight, the G stands for guide, and the final E stands for effort. So let me walk through these components just briefly for you here. The first E stands for enrich, and it's about how we enrich or provide value in any sort of circumstance or situation that we're going to be in. And so for individuals, this is around things like your strengths or your weaknesses or your underestimated strengths, and really understanding how those play out, not just for yourself in terms of self-awareness, but also in terms of, again, those perceptions and stereotypes that others have about you, and honing your ability to see how they might be evaluating your strengths based on a variety of different signals and cues, based on the industry that you're operating in or the mix of people that you're speaking with, that they're going to see the value you provide differently based on those sorts of things. And so for individuals, the key here is really being able to take those perceptions and flip those perhaps stereotypes in your favor, guide and redirect those so that they do work in your favor. So that's sort of the E part, the enrich for individuals. But for companies, right, this exists as well. So, you know, one company, an example of this is a company called Buc-ee's, right? A company that is based out of Texas, and it's essentially a gas station. And I was working with Buc-ee's and talking with sort of the organization in terms of their plans for growth and their plans for trying to sort of compete in this very antiquated, really traditional set kind of industry, right? They're a gas station, but they sort of said, well, what can we sort of really do? And so I talked to them about sort of enrich and the pieces, that the components around how they enrich and provide value. And so this case study kind of emphasizes something where, you know, they realized working through sort of some of these conversations and this framework, you know, what are gas stations in Texas expected to do, right? They're expected to provide gas. They're expected to, if you're on a road trip, you stop there to go to the bathroom. Maybe you stop to get ice for your cooler or your drinks. And so working with them, we discovered that the way in which they enrich is really by honing in on these strengths and doing each of those really well, right? So Buc-ee's is now this gas station that is so, I mean, it's humongous and amazing. It was voted cleanest bathrooms in the United States. It's got gas pumps. You never have to wait. They decided they were going to do those three things really, really well. And so now when you're sort of driving through Texas, Buc-ee's is almost a tourist destination. People stop and they use the bathrooms. And then while they're stopping there to use the bathrooms, they buy ice and they buy lots of their higher margin items. They've got their own branded food now, their own branded clothing and accessories and all these, all from understanding how they enrich. So that's the E piece. The D piece stands for delight. And delight is really about cracking that door open when you don't have that opportunity to enrich and show how you provide value. It's often because you've been underestimated or because you're facing some sort of constraint. So the delight piece, delight is sort of this hard aspect to kind of bottle up and understand what it is. But one way to sort of understand it is I want you to think about the very first time you rode in an Uber. Right, the very first time you're in an Uber, And so, if you're like me, the first time I rode an Uber, it was sort of this experience of like, what is going on? Like, this is so cool, but terrifying, right? I'm in this stranger's car and I have no idea who this person is. It's their car and they're just going to take me to where I need to go. I'm not going to hand over any money. But at the same time, it was, there was this instantaneous point. There's this couple of seconds where I stopped and I was on alert, right? That's delight. It's that couple of seconds. It's not necessarily positive or negative, but it's a couple of seconds where you stop and you pause because you were considering something that you then you want to learn more, or it's surprising or slightly counterintuitive. When you're able to inspire that feeling in someone else as a company or as an individual, that's when you're able to have that door cracked open a little bit and you're able to show how you enrich or provide value. That's that sort of delight piece. The G stands for guide, which is to say that even when you enrich and delight, that you constantly need to be guiding those perceptions of others, guiding those perceptions to who you authentically are, to what your company is actually, what your company is actually doing. And in my book, I outline out multiple different ways that we can actually guide and redirect those perceptions of others. I'll give a quick example of I'll give one or two quick examples of how this sort of works. The first is sort of, if you think about those perceptions that are out there are negative and positive perceptions that are always floating around. And so what I found is that you can actually, because of these positive and negative perceptions, so perceptions, for example, that this company is committed and they are trustworthy, or this individual is conscientious and hardworking. There are also negative connotations, negative perceptions, right? Things like this person is shallow, this person is shallow, or, what other negative perceptions are there? Deceptive, egotistical, unreliable, those sorts of perceptions. And what I found is that they actually cluster together, right? In such a way that there are certain positive perceptions that always cluster together with negative perceptions, where I could take the same individual and based on those signals and cues, in one context, they might be seen as conscientious and resourceful. But in another context, they would be seen as boastful and shallow. And so there were ways in which, just like there's a thin line between love and hate, that you could actually flip these perceptions between those positive and negative perceptions, that you could take these negative attributions and position in such a way that they would then flip over to those positive manifestations of that. So let me give you a really quick example of how this might work. So for example, I studied an individual's accent, and I found that if someone had an accent, that there were some perceptions about that person, that they were perhaps the lay perception might be that they're not as good at communication, right? Or because of their accent, they're not as good at communicators. But underlying that, these individuals, there were perceptions being bestowed upon them around things like perhaps they don't take initiative, or they're not as good at planning, or not as creative. And so I would tell these individuals before going into a job interview, for example, I would say the perception they have about you is that you don't take initiative, or you're not as good at planning, or you're not as creative. And over the course of these interviews, I would hear them saying things like, let me give you an example of when I'm a strong advocate for my team. Let me tell you about a time when I fought for resources for my team. Or let me tell you about a time when I took initiative, or I have a track record of listening to clients. That by sort of guiding those perceptions around those underlying perceptions, that they were more likely to get the job, the raise, the promotion, the funding for their ventures, whatever the sort of outcome that I was looking at. And that was because not only were they rated higher in terms of initiative or creativity or planning, they were actually rated higher in terms of communication skills, something that they didn't even talk about at all. But that because there was this fine line between people's perceptions of what was happening based on their communication skills, that they were able to flip this in their favor. Organizations can do this as well. So for example, I found that certain organizations, there's this congruence that consumers or that partners or investors of certain companies expect. That if your company is in certain industries, for example, that you're not going to care as much about social issues, or that you're not going to care about certain factors as much, but just even being able to sort of redirect and talking about how, this technology can serve a worldwide customer base, or that this technology is something that is widely dispersible, right? That it allows the observer to sort of see where there is that congruence. And so time and time again, we sort of see these instances of how you can actually guide and redirect. I want to give one more quick example of how we sort of guide and redirect as individuals as well as leaders, how we can support individuals within our organizations, because this is sort of, there's a lot of complexity here where gaining an edge, it can be anything from an individual trying to gain an edge to entire corporations who are trying to gain an edge. And so the first kind of category was these perceptions, these static perceptions. The second that I want to talk about is interpersonal, these sort of interpersonal relationships that we have with others. So this is things like, for example, questions and answers that we might engage in with others. So we might ask a question of someone else and they might respond, or we might get a question asked of us and then we respond. And I found that a lot of misperceptions and a lot of constraints and obstacles actually happen during these interactions. So for example, I found that over in my research, I find that there are two different types of questions. Largely, there are two different types of questions that are out there. There are what are called, well, actually, let me give you a couple of examples first and then sort of see what you think of these differences. So imagine I asked you, first of all, things like, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Right? Imagine you're in an interview situation, or you're with a client, or you're with someone, and you receive the question or you ask the question, right? Can you tell us a bit about yourself? What's your long-term vision? Or what does success look like to you? Now contrast that with another set of questions, right? Things like, what type of people do you feel least comfortable with? Or what do you consistently worry about the most? Or what do you think is your biggest barrier to success? Right, so if we think about those two different types of questions, the first type are what are called promotion-focused questions. They're questions about the opportunity, how big you could take something, how big the organization could get, how big you could get, the opportunities, the success, the vision, all of those sorts of things. The second set of questions are what are called prevention-focused questions. They're questions about the risks, the limitations, the constraints behind something. And what I found in my research is that based on who we are and what we look like, or based on certain signals of our company or our organization, that we're more likely to be in either a promotion-focused orientation or a prevention-focused orientation, meaning that people are more likely, overwhelmingly in life, to be asking you either promotion-focused or prevention-focused questions. So an example of this is that I find, for example, that venture capitalists and investors frame their questions in these two very different ways. And so for certain entrepreneurs, people with technical backgrounds, for example, or women entrepreneurs are more likely to get asked prevention-focused questions. So they're more likely to get asked questions like, how many daily and monthly users do you have? Or, is this a defensible business? tell me about your break-even point, or are you planning to Turing test this? Whereas those with perhaps marketing backgrounds, or those who are male entrepreneurs, or a variety of different signals, were more likely to get asked promotion-focused questions. Questions like, what future target markets are you going to go after? Or how do you plan on acquiring new customer segments in the future? What major milestones are you planning? What's your overall long-term brand vision? And so what happens is that when we are asked a prevention-focused question, we stay at the prevention-focused level in responding. And when we're asked a promotion-focused question, we stay at a promotion orientation in responding. So at the end of the day, who is the investor going to invest in? The person who is talking about break even and daily users, or the person who's going to talk about their future customers and their brand vision and their growth strategy? Of course, they're going to be investing in those who are in the promotion-oriented category. So what do we do about this? What do we do about this as leaders of organizations, or for our team members, or trying to address this individually? Well, what I find is that when you recognize that you're getting asked a prevention-focused question, you answer it, but you do so quickly, and then you flip it to a promotion-oriented response. So for example, if you get asked a question about competitors, you might say something like, yes, there are a lot of competitors in the industry, including X and Y and Z. But what our product or service is able to do is all of these other things that allow us to go after new markets and new customers and new segments, right? So you answer the question, but you do so quickly, and you flip it to a promotion orientation. And in those instances, I find that not only are you more likely to see those positive outcomes, you're actually more likely to get the deal or the promotion or the customers or whatever it may be than those who only received the promotion-oriented question. In fact, what it shows is that you actually gain an edge over those who only receive those promotion-oriented questions. So there are ways to sort of guide and redirect so that you show who you authentically are, and you're not limited by these types of constraints and obstacles that are out there. So these are two different ways that we can think about guiding. And I outline multiple different ways, and I know we don't have time to get into all of those different ways here, but that's really how you can sort of, through that guiding process, continue to emphasize how you enrich and how you delight and how you guide, so that that final E which stands for effort and hard work, so that you enrich, delight, and guide, so that your effort and hard work actually work harder for you. And that's where we started from today, that we often think that effort and hard work come first, that if you put in that hard work, it'll speak for itself. But it actually comes last. It comes last in this framework, because even though it's critical, when you know how you enrich and delight and guide, that's when your effort and hard work actually work harder for you. That's how you ultimately gain an edge. So thank you so much for joining me for a little bit around how you take adversity, how you understand adversity. I know that there's all different types of adversity, and we're only sort of just scratching the tip of the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg here. But I want to say, if you want to learn more, I have lots of resources. Feel free to check out those resources on my website, laurahuang.net. You can sign up for my monthly newsletter. There's also a nonprofit that I work with, where we work with lots of underestimated and underserved communities, including the Asian American communities and Pacific Islander communities, to sort of teach these principles around how to gain an edge, so that you can make your hard work and your hard work harder for you. So check out Project Amplify, projectamplify.org, laurahuang.net. And thank you so much for joining me for this brief introduction into how to gain an edge.